Hello, everybody. It's me, Argent, and I'm back here with my frequent co-host, Nazbol gang. And today we're going to be talking about DEFCON Everyone Dies, IRL. So we're going to be talking about is there a likelihood or possibility of nuclear war? What's going to happen with proliferation as America declines as a great power, etc. So, my friend, why don't you start us off?
Okay, so I'm Nazbol gang. Obviously, you guys have seen me before. Um, so you guys have seen me before. Anyway, so as time increases, the states with nuclear weapons will increase. Some states have voluntarily given up nuclear weapons. Many people, of course, recognize the danger involved with nuclear weapons. So there's the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the desire to renounce nuclear weapons or limit them. So you've seen, the SALT treaties, the anti-nuclear missile treaties, and all those things, the limiting of tactical nuclear weapons, and Russia and the United States after the Cold War and at the end of the Cold War era deliberately decreasing their stockpiles. And you saw the voluntary giving up of South Africa, Ukraine, Belarus, and Kazakhstan of their nuclear weapons. So because of this and because of the Cold War, many people, including, ironically enough, political scientists that I talked to, don't really see nuclear war as a very high possibility. But I believe, including you, contrary to this, I see it as extremely high because there's no reason. I'm not very good at remembering thought experiments or what they're called, but nuclear weapons don't really have. If you have a nuclear weapon, you have no reason to give it up. States don't really have such reasons to do these things. You have no incentive to give up nuclear weapons if you already have them. You get this problem. Again, I don't know exactly. Everyone will probably know what the thought experiment is when I say it. So if you go to a movie theater or you go to a theater to see an orchestra or any kind of theater, everybody benefits if everyone sits down. But the one person, yes, the prisoner dilemma. So if one person stands up, they will benefit greatly, but everyone else will stop benefiting. Eventually, everyone will stand up. Nuclear weapons have a prisoner's dilemma with them. For the entire human race, it would be very beneficial for nuclear weapons not to exist because of their destructive potential in warfare. In myself, I actually believe in mutually assured destruction is the reason that there hasn't been a war between great powers. If nuclear weapons didn't exist, I believe that there would have been a conventional war between the Soviet Union and the United States as early as the Berlin airlift in 48-49. Not even counting the Korean War itself, it would have very likely splintered out into a great war. But the downside is if any such great war between great powers and increasingly regional powers were to happen, if they're nuclear armed or even armed with chemical weapons, which people don't talk about when the proliferation of chemical weapons very much because they have great destructive potential as well. Sorry to make that side note. Even despite limiting conventional warfare, nuclear weapons, if they're ever used, would they would destroy more lives than World War II, even in a regional context, in a war between, say, Pakistan and India, or
and it would not be recoverable.
Yes, if a state was stricken with multiple nuclear weapons at once in a time frame of, say, a few hours, that state would go to the destruction. Like, the communications would be absolutely annihilated and they would drop. So if you destroyed the United States with like 10 nuclear weapons, the infrastructure of the United States and the communication infrastructure especially would be synonymous with, say, the Central Republic or Central African Republic or Somalia or Chad or something like that. Essentially, the country would then starve to death. It would have immense destructive potential. And if such a thing happened, especially with great powers, one would question the viability of if the human race will ever continue technologically, or at least for centuries.
Is nuclear winter like a real thing, or is it a meme?
I don't believe it's real. I'm not scientifically confident enough to talk about it. I haven't done that research, but it seems that it was a myth in the 80s. There would be massive
destruction.
Okay, so
radiation.
Radiation, it would be contained. It depends. We don't have an experiment, a real life experiment, if such a thing happened. But regardless of the radiation itself, they would have regional ecological destruction. But something else that's important to know is the destruction of infrastructure and the de-maintenance of it would probably be worse ecologically than the radiation. And it would also cause massive firestorms, which could engulf which would engulf much of the countryside of said country. But so you have a prisoner's dilemma.
Because all the power plants would like overload or go out.
Well, you have so you have EMT blasts with nuclear weapons, and you wouldn't have any shielding. EMT, yeah, sorry, electromagnetic pulse.
Yep.
So if you use nuclear weapons, the electromagnetic pulse would make throughout the entire nation, would make the infrastructure, the electronic infrastructure, worthless, and it would destroy much of the roadways. It would clog them up, and it would destroy the trains, and industrial society would cease to function. And most of the people would starve to death.
Mm-hmm.
So you do not.
So in other words, you're saying that the only way to end the degeneracy of the modern world is to start a nuclear war?
What is? Sorry, I guess so. I don't.
I was being sarcastic.
I think that you kind of view us as locked. You have a negative viewpoint, and you see my viewpoint as more positive, because I believe in a catastrophe, or as you jokingly call it, a happening, as being very likely, while you think that we'll just limp into a multicultural dystopia, right?
No, I was more making fun of anarcho-primitivism.
Oh, well, I think
nuclear war.
I think the nuclear war would make. I mean, if you had every country being a Somalia, the environmental destruction would be unimaginable, because there would be no one to regulate any kind of anything, really.
Mm-hmm.
You would have like it would probably result. I mean, depending on the scale, like I believe that the human species would survive. I believe that human beings probably, unless if you just like, I think human beings will last biologically as long as there is terrestrial vertebrates.
Mm-hmm.
I think that human beings are such a successful species, you would have to destroy like pretty much photosynthesis in order to destroy human beings.
Yeah,
but
I tend to agree with that.
I think that human beings are the most adaptable terrestrial vertebrate in the history of the world. But you'd probably result in a at least a mild mass extinction event. It would be like a KT kind of boundary. If you had like a Soviet Union, China, United States, 1980s scale of tens of thousands of warheads going off. But I don't think that that's that likely. I believe that they wouldn't use every single warhead. They would just use a few, but it would have it would destroy industrial civilization. But you don't believe that nuclear weapons are very likely. Could you explain why you think?
What about a limited exchange if just Pakistan and India blew each other up?
Well, that's what's extremely likely. Okay, so let's say that Pakistan and India blow each other up over Kashmir. Okay, so how many refugees is that going to be?
Okay, I see what you mean.
You have 800 million refugees now. The entire world economy collapses.
The camp of the saints.
Yes, the real camp of, like, the West. If you had a nuclear war between Pakistan and India, and imagine if Sweden took in,
All of them.
if Sweden took in, say, 4 million refugees, that wouldn't cover. That would be like maybe like 0.5%, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you would have, so if Pakistan and India went to a nuclear war, you would have refugees swamp all the other. So you have refugees swamp Bangladesh, Iran, Afghanistan. They would just be trying to run away out of the country. You couldn't maintain them in. You would have to have the United Nations actually blockade these nations and have them starve to death within to maintain world order. Not to mention, if you had both those countries, even if they aren't the biggest section of the world economy, you would have those countries like their entire. It would cause a global depression overnight because their economic output and their connection to the world would go to zero instantly.
Also, I think it would cause an environmental catastrophe, probably in the entire Indian Ocean.
Oh yeah, well, so if you had so many, so people would just devour all the terrestrial animals, right? And they would devour all the crops.
I meant like the radiation.
The radiation
infrastructure.
Yes.
Like I think people might like exaggerate radiation, like when it came to Fukushima, but I feel if you had like a full scale nuclear exchange, it would destroy the environment of the entire Indian subcontinent. Like
if you had a one nuclear weapon hit New York City, the United States wouldn't have enough medical personnel in the entire United States to deal with the wounded from New York City alone.
Mm-hmm.
The scale of such a thing is unimaginable. But let's put it like this. I want to give you a scenario that's pretty likely. So as the United States declines as a great power and the world becomes multipolar, states will be in a prisoner's dilemma and want to develop nuclear weapons. Okay, so this is a scenario that's actually given in World War Z. Have you ever seen World War Z or read World War Z, the book?
Just 1 second. The reason nations want to develop nukes is because it basically makes them immune to conventional invasion, right?
Okay, yeah. So there's been Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and South Africa have given up their nukes. Ukraine was invaded by Russia, and the South African political party gave up power, and their ethnic minority, which was dominant in the nation, as we know, the apartheid regime, their ethnic minority is now persecuted. So states that give up nuclear weapons have seen that it's been not a very good plus. So North Korea doesn't really have any incentive whatsoever to give up their nuclear weapons.
Well, because nuclear weapons, as I said, make you immune. Because if Iran got nukes, they could just say, well, nuke Israel if you invade.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the scenario I'm giving. Iran is the United States is unable to enforce a nuclear non-proliferation treaty, and Russia and China, as there's more people within it. France goes its own way to a certain extent. Japan will develop nuclear weapons that the United States will not conventionally defend.
Japan could develop them basically overnight.
It would take a few years for them to build a triad, though. But they could have a bomb. They could get bomber-ready nukes.
Sorry, what's a triad? Is that submarines?
A triad is missiles, submarines, and bombers. Nuclear triad. Okay, it would take them a few years to develop ICBMs and to develop much longer, probably develop nuclear submarines.
I think they could make bombs pretty easily.
Okay, so yeah, yes, but let's continue. Well, they could have a problem developing the triggering with tritium. The United States, I don't know how much salt to put in it, but the United States has problems developing the triggers for nuclear weapons, for tritium. But, okay, let's say that they can't really enforce nuclear non-proliferation, and Iran develops nuclear weapons. Okay, so Pakistan has an economic meltdown similar to Venezuela for some reason, right? Mm-hmm. Now there are millions of refugees swarming in from Pakistan to Iran. Pakistan's infrastructure to prevent a nuclear war is with India. It has no infrastructure to prevent a nuclear war with Iran. And their relations
Sorry, why would
deteriorate
Iran use nuclear weapons against Pakistan?
because it's unable to communicate with its government and stop the flow of refugees.
Oh, okay.
So such a situation escalates until Iran and Pakistan are in a nuclear war. Because the problem here is when you have more nuclear powers. This is the example from World War Z, by the way. But the problem here is if you have more nuclear powers, you have an infrastructure designed to prevent nuclear war between Russia and the United States, right?
Right.
But there's no infrastructure to prevent, and there's mild infrastructure to prevent India and Pakistan, but there's no infrastructure to say prevent a nuclear war between India and China because it's not very likely, and there's less to because Pakistan and China are allies to somewhat. If somehow there was some kind of scenario where Pakistan and China had pretty big problems, there's no infrastructure to prevent such a war. They don't have any red line. They would have really bad communications. There's no communications infrastructure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you know how Iran has an incentive to develop nuclear weapons.
Well, they have an immense one because you have assholes like John McCain who threaten to invade them every 6 months.
Okay, so do the countries that have their territory disrespected by China in the South China Sea, do you think that they have a high incentive to develop nuclear weapons?
Yes.
Okay, so let's see where you have a scenario where Indonesia and Vietnam develop nuclear weapons. Do you think that the alliance of
Vietnam
Indonesia
has a huge incentive.
it has a
to develop
very
nuclear
massive incentive for Vietnam to develop nuclear weapons. But say Vietnam and Indonesia develop nuclear weapons and they have some kind of alliance against China of convenience. And then for some reason they have some kind of deterioration with each other. They don't really have the infrastructure to prevent a nuclear war. Because part of the problem with proliferation or non-proliferation is that you build this incentive to prevent a nuclear war between powers. But there's some kind of crisis which isn't foreseen, the nuclear war becomes very likely in a black swan event between nuclear powers that don't have communications to prevent nuclear war. In a world where you'd say have 20 nuclear powers. I believe there's 9 right now. The United States, Russia, well, the 5 founding members of the UN, so United States, Russia, France, United Kingdom, People's Republic of China, and then you have India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. So
Israel
there's 9
doesn't
currently.
have nuclear weapons.
Yes, let's claim that Israel doesn't have nuclear weapons because they say they don't.
Now, something I've heard, and I don't know if you or someone in the chat can maybe tell us, but I had heard that Saudi Arabia paid for the Pakistani
yes.
nuclear program
Yeah.
on the condition that they could buy nukes from them if they
I don't
wanted
think
to.
that there was a condition. I thought it was that they just did it out of Islamic Brotherhood. I don't know if they do exactly. I don't know exactly. But Saudi Arabia and China both helped Pakistan's nuclear weapons program.
Mm-hmm.
Can you say why you think it's unlikely a nuclear war would occur? That's interesting to me.
I tend to think that most of the countries that have nukes or will have nukes have too strong a self-preservation instinct and realize what would happen if they went to it. And there's only a certain number of countries that have enough nukes to make it cataclysmic.
But do you think that there will be an increase of states with nuclear weapons over time? If in a multipolar world? So I would say Iran, Vietnam, and Japan will eventually develop nukes off the top of my head right now.
I can't see any of those 3 using them.
Okay, but if you had a dictator like if Saddam Hussein had nukes during the Iran-Iraq war, would he have used them?
He probably would have. Yeah.
Okay, so would have Idi Amin used them?
That's true. Actually,
would Pol Pot have used them?
Yes.
So, are Cambodians any smarter than Vietnamese people?
No.
Okay, are Cambodians any smarter than Pakistanis or
Probably
Iranians?
not Iranians, but probably Pakistanis.
Okay, so you kind of get to that point where you have, as states will go on over time, you're going to have states which will be somewhat unstable. Okay, do you think if Yugoslavia had nuclear weapons and Croatia and the Muslim Bosnians and Serbians had them, do you think there could have been nuclear weapons in the Yugoslavian Civil War?
I think the bigger issue, and someone pointed this out in chat, is non-state actors getting their hands on nuclear weapons.
Yeah, but we'll talk about that in a second. Do you think that there could be a nuclear war and a civil war?
Yeah.
So if Pakistan or Russia had a civil war, do you think that there could be the use of nuclear weapons? Like there was the use of nerve gas in the Syrian civil war?
I mean, it's possible. I don't. The question is, would it just be a couple nukes, or would it be a ton of nukes, or I don't know what level it would go to.
Well, any use of nuclear weapons is the use of nuclear weapons, and any use of nuclear weapons would result in millions of refugees. Right?
Right.
It would be the worst refugee problem in the history of the world. Because of the destruction that they have on the infrastructure would be so immense that it would be worse than any conventional war. Because that area has to be abandoned for some period of time, essentially, because of the radiation.
Right.
So you want to talk about non-state actors getting nuclear weapons?
I think to a certain extent, it's interesting. Will the
keep in mind, I think that nuclear war between NATO and Russia is actually very likely.
Really? I
Yes.
would think it's like non-existent.
No, it's very likely. Like really likely. It's probably more likely now than it was during, like, except for like the early 80s and like the Cuban Missile Crisis. It's as likely as ever been. Because the United States is very self-assured of its military capability. And if you actually read through neocon, so the neocons aren't very militarily, they're almost all civilians, and they don't understand how nuclear weapons work. So neocons like John McCain and Donald Rumsfeld believe that George W. Bush should have had a conventional war with Russia and Georgia. So let's say if the United... What?
The problem with having a conventional war is if one side loses, then they don't have an incentive to not use nuclear weapons.
Yes, but here's a bigger problem. Okay, so it's been observed during non-warfare that sides will panic. And so there's the example of if there's a computer error, then people will panic. Or during Operation Able Archer, people will panic. So if you have a conventional war and you're using conventional bombers, and the conventional bombers are penetrating, say, Russian airspace or American airspace, then that could lead to a panic, which will result in the releasing of nuclear weapons. How can you assume that B-2 bomber, because B-2 bombers and any stealth technology is a first strike weapon, they're not very useful in a conventional war. They're very useful as a first strike weapon because they can't be discovered. You have to modify your radar in certain ways to discover them initially. But so you see this B-2 bomber going. How do you know that B-2 bomber is just conventional and it just penetrated Russian airspace a little bit? How do the Russians know exactly when that B-2 bomber is going to turn back? You kind of get to the situation if you read about Operation Able Archer, just a training exercise. how close the Russians were to to believing that they're under a first strike. If you have a conventional warfare between nuclear powers and they believe that there's a first strike, they could launch their first strike, what they believe is their second strike in self-defense.
Has Trump withdrawn the U.S. from a lot of the limitation talks with
Yes,
Russia?
the United States is withdrawing most of the Cold War, the end of the Cold War treaties.
And
the United States is pushing aggressively to put anti-ballistic missiles. I don't think that anti-ballistic missile equipment will be very effective against Russian missiles because Russian missiles are actually more advanced than American missiles. I don't
Oh, they
know
would be
how well
against
that's known.
probably like shitty third world countries.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that they're breaking the direct treaties during the Cold War themselves and starting a new arms race, which is
I
terrifying.
actually
The United States has abandoned nuclear non-proliferation effectively.
That is something I actually will say I really disagree with Trump on.
No, Trump agrees with us.
Oh, he does? Then why are they leaving?
Why are they doing? Because they're forcing Trump to be more aggressive. You didn't hear about the Senate just voting that Trump can't withdraw from Afghanistan and Syria?
Oh, so he wanted to continue the limitation treaties, but the Senate is against it?
Yeah, the Senate is very aggressive. And the problem is when you're leading to these things is when you have these civilian democratic governments that don't understand how nuclear weapons work, and they're acting very aggressively. And now I think it's very, very likely that, I don't say it's 100% likely or even like 50-50 likely, but I'm saying like 1 out of a quarter, like 25% or 20% likely that war would start out between the United States and Russia. When you have the United States media so neurotic and the politicians follow the media and they say that Russia is directly influencing American elections and flipping to get Trump to win, you have this situation of extreme Russophobia in the United States right now.
Now, something that really scares me is the Republican Party's generally, I think, swinging, and you can agree or disagree with me, in a more nationalistic, paleo-conservative direction.
We'll see how far this goes if Trump loses and when Trump leaves office, and we'll see the trajectory after Trump. But I don't want to call it paleo-conservative. I want to call it populist and national and civic nationalist.
Okay.
Because paleo-conservative would mean that they would draw down it would mean a decrease in federal power, and they don't seem to support that.
I meant more less interventionist.
Yeah. So yeah. Okay. Yes.
Whereas I feel like the neocons have parked their flag in the Democratic Party, and the Democrats have become the neocon party. But the issue is the Republicans are still the neocon party. So you have a scenario
we have two
where
different neocon parties. Yes.
Yeah, because I feel like the Democrats during the Obama era were sorry, not Obama era, during the Bush era were like actively anti-intervention. At least they claimed to be anti-intervention. But like during the Obama era, I found both parties were just super pro invading everything. Or
yes.
Would you agree with me on that? Or
yes. They're starting to. Is it Tulsi Gabbard? What's the representative from Hawaii that's running for president?
Yeah.
They're criticizing her as being like a Russian puppet because she's not an interventionist.
Because she doesn't want to have a war with Russia.
Yeah. And most of the people that they support, like Kamala Harris and people like that, will be pretty aggressive militarily. They're not very anti-intervention.
But I recall during the Obama's term, both the Democrats and Republicans wanted him to invade Syria.
Yes. Yes, and Hillary Clinton's campaign platform, part of it was having a no-fly zone over Syria, which would involve conventional warfare, air warfare with Russia and Syria.
That would have been if I was Russia, I would.
The United States might actually lose that, by the way. We don't know, but it's very possible that Russia's air defenses are superior and that Russia might actually in a limited scenario, it's not able to. So the most advanced Russian fighters might be better than the most advanced American fighters, or equal or slightly subpar. But when you have like a limited scenario and they're able to use their very best, then they'll be on our equal. There is kind of a problem where they're using old MiGs for their air defense, and we have a higher budget, so we can have newer fighters. But in Syria, it would be equal, or Russia would win. Is what I'm trying to say.
Well, Russia's rocketry has always been far ahead of America.
Yeah, the Russian rocketry, except for
it's always been.
In like
with the exception of maybe parts of the space. I mean, in terms of like surface-to-air missiles. And artillery.
Yeah, there was an era like in the 60s where the United States was superior with with ICBMs, but the 70s on, Russia is always, even during the 90s, Russia's had an advantage.
Right.
The SS-18 Satan, and is now being upgraded, is the greatest weapon system ever developed by human beings.
It's the but yeah, like if I was Russia and they imposed a no-fly zone over Syria, I would consider that an act of war.
Yes, it is an act of war. It is an act of war. Hillary Clinton ran on starting a war with Russia.
I remember how you won election night.
Yeah.
You drink a bit much. Like, I don't want to die in a nuclear war.
Well, I consider nuclear war very likely.
Well,
did you want to talk about non-state actors in nuclear war?
Yeah, I just gotta say, I don't know if things will get more or less. I think how the Republican Party goes will be very important, because if they stay neocon and the Dems become neocon, like, they're crazy. Like you said, these people are not military men. They're civilians who have no idea how any of this shit works.
I remember I was reading a book, and I looked up the article, and it was one of the primary like neocon Russian experts, and they said that the United States could put a air carrier strike group into the Sea at Azov over the Kerch stretch or strait. The Sea at Azov is like 7 meters deep on average. Like, every single U.S. warship would run aground there. Yet they didn't know that the United States, that they would run aground. They didn't know the depth of the sea.
Well, to me, the F-35 is like kind of the ultimate example of neocon war planning.
Well, I don't know if it's neocon. It's more of like you have a system that is more inclined. They aren't inclined to winning wars. They're inclined to generating the most tax revenue money for themselves in the arms industry.
Which is why they hate close air support so much. Like, they despise close air support for some reason.
I don't know exactly why. They just don't prioritize it. They prioritize there are generals that retire to get massive cash benefits that are part of the problem there too. But it's just dominated by civilians that don't know what they're doing.
Right.
Can you explain to me why you think that nuclear war is unlikely?
I just don't think anyone has the balls for it at the moment.
Okay, but do you think that over time it will increase in likelihood if there's more states with nuclear weapons?
I think I misunderstood what you meant by nuclear war.
Okay. Because I'm talking about all use of nuclear weapons in warfare.
Okay, so I thought you were only referring to like
Russia versus US.
War, like something that would happen in DEFCON. Everyone dies.
Yeah, or Threads or the day after. Is that what you thought I was talking about?
Yeah, but no, it's not unlikely. for especially like smaller states that are irredentist and run by crazy people.
Yes, well, it's very
Like,
likely within a civil war too, because you have to realize this nerve gas has been used in the Iran-Iraq War in the Kurdish uprising by Saddam Hussein, and it was used by the rebels, I believe. Now, I know that there's a lot of lies within the Syrian civil war. Nerve gas is extremely effective. It is a very effective weapon of mass destruction, and it's been used in civil wars.
right.
I believe that those people had the capacity to use nuclear weapons, they would have used them. The rebels in Syria and Saddam Hussein.
Right.
Did you want to talk about non-state actors in nuclear weapons?
Yeah, so that was one of the points people made over the years was some country like Iran would use implausible deniability and give Hezbollah or some other non-state actor a nuke and just be like, look the other way for them to attack Israel. I guess it's kind of like the neocon fear.
Yeah, I guess so. But the thing is that you have to have a situation where there's enough corruption. So you believe it would be state terror? So it would be state-sponsored terrorism, or do you believe the Russian mafia selling it to somebody?
No, I mean there's a couple. Like in my mind, the country that scares me the most having nukes is Pakistan.
Yes.
Because Pakistan is like not even a country. Like it's the military has like their fortress in Jalalabad, but like half the country is run by fucking tribes. You have Islamists running all over. Like it's a fucking like shit show.
How many military coups have they had since independence?
And like extremely corrupt politicians. So I'm like, I remember I was watching, it was a couple of years ago, and they were like talking about nukes in Pakistan, and they're like, we just our strategy for preventing people from using them, from stealing them, is just to move them around the country. And I'm like, that does not sound
so. Let's put it like this: I don't know if like some terrorists would just blow up Israel with it, or like if some, I don't know, like some like crazy person had them. I think it's more interesting to think of if like Pakistan sold nuclear weapons to an African state and then African states used them on each other.
Okay, or
that
what
actually
if
seems pretty likely to me too.
What if some like subsection in the Pakistani government used them against India? Like not the actual.
Yeah, so you have a coup d'etat and they use them against India. That's very. I see that.
No, not even that. Just like some guys in the military. There's like some secret society or faction in the army who uses nukes. It just like uses one or two and starts it.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I haven't read that much on states. So Warsaw Pact believed that you could use tactical nuclear weapons if you didn't attack, say, France or the United Kingdom or the United States directly on their soil. They wouldn't have used nuclear weapons. So this is seen in the 7 Days to the Rhine nuclear war exercise. So that was their strategy. France believed that if they were struck with one nuclear weapon, they would use everything they had against whoever. So they believed that if they were hit with a small megaton or kiloton or whatever warhead, a tactical warhead, by Russia in the Soviet Union in some kind of conventional or limited nuclear war, if they were ever struck by the Soviet Union, they would do a full entire. They would attack with everything they have to kill as many civilians as possible. I don't know if India would do such a thing, but it's very likely to see that they would. So you have a scenario where there's a bunch of generals that are basically an Islamic cult, and
or just ultra nationalists. They don't
ultra nationalists. Yeah, that's pretty likely. And then India, so they hit India with 2 nukes, and then India responds by decapitating all of Pakistan, and then you have like 100 million refugees now.
Now, India, I'm not as worried about, but it's not completely.
I think India is a. India at the moment is a very stable state, but looking down the line, I don't believe that India will be a state forever.
Like, I can't see China ever really using them. Maybe that's naive of me.
I see China. I see Taiwan developing nuclear weapons because there's a reason for. So North Korea has an incentive to develop nuclear weapons as a rogue state. South Africa developed nuclear weapons as a rogue state. Israel developed nuclear weapons as a rogue state. Taiwan is a rogue state, so Taiwan could develop nuclear weapons.
Well, Taiwan needs nukes. They existentially need nuclear weapons.
Yeah. Anyway, China's military strategy is to kill as many civilians as possible if they're in a war with Taiwan and force them to surrender.
Okay, another country where even if it's not government policy, could you see like a coup in North Korea or some like rogue general using nukes?
No, here I'll explain what I think a rogue state could do with nukes. Either North Korea or Israel. Okay, let's talk about North Korea. So North Korea is facing a famine. North Korea, so you have somebody that's a very hard negotiator with both China. Maybe China is in economic depression. North Korea is facing a famine because of it, and the United States is a very hard negotiator. And does not want.
Sorry, I just want to address one thing from the chat. People are saying Taiwan doesn't have the infrastructure to develop nuclear weapons.
Taiwan is extremely high intelligence people. Taiwan can develop nuclear. If South Africa could develop nuclear weapons, Taiwan can.
Okay, fair enough.
Taiwan can buy the materials from another country, even if they don't have it on them themselves. And they can buy them from Africans. What?
Or North Korea.
North Korea, I think, has native uranium.
No, but they'd sell them the technology. They definitely would.
No, Taiwan can develop the technology on their own.
Right.
They don't have. Their problem is they don't have materials within Taiwan, I believe. Right. So they would have to buy. They would have to get materials from another state because. From my understanding, it's believed that Israel got their materials and they developed with South Africa, their nuclear program with South Africa, and they got their fissile material from South Africa.
Right.
I don't know exactly because it's extremely classified and Israel doesn't talk about these things. I don't know how Israel maintains tritium in their triggering devices because those have really low half-lives. The actual material, the uranium and the plutonium has really long half-lives, but the triggering devices, the tritium has very short ones. I don't know how Israel gets a continuous stream of tritium. But anyway, so I believe North Korea could use nuclear weapons as a way of negotiating food in a famine. To go back to the story. If North Korea is put against a wall, they could start using their nuclear weapons as a threat, as a way to negotiate resources. And I believe Israel could do that too if they're facing a wall. That's why a rogue state would do them, because they will always have the upper hand, the absolute highest upper hand if they have nuclear weapons in any kind of negotiation against the world. That makes them equal if they're a rogue state.
I think with
Israel to negotiate with the United States, North Korea doesn't have to be able to strike the United States. North Korea just needs to be able to. They could strike Seoul, right? But they could also strike Tokyo. North Korea could strike Tokyo, and it would destroy the biggest city in the world and cause an economic meltdown, a global depression with that. So any kind of negotiation, they don't need to strike the United States. They just need to have a missile which could strike Tokyo, and they are equal. the United States doesn't have any upper hand over North Korea then, especially if they're autarkic. Their rogue states is autarkic.
Yeah. Could you see North Korea selling nukes to like some non-state actor?
No. I think that
No, you don't. So
I don't see any reason for, like, what non-state act what. So Iran has an objective in a certain way to sell nuclear, or Iran or Pakistan as Muslims existentially might want to destroy Israel. North Korea just wants to unite the Korean Peninsula, and all their state terrorism is just to unite the peninsula, right?
I more just thought to make a quick buck.
No, I don't think so. I think that they can make. I don't think that they have. I think that. No, I don't.
Okay, I just wanted to say the whole artillery pointing at Seoul thing is kind of a meme.
What do you mean?
Seoul isn't that close to the border, and the only place that they could fight.
It's not a meme because they can launch Ciaran gas in the artillery.
Oh, that's why
they have massive chemical weapons reserves, and they could hit it with the artillery, and it would go downwind. People don't, because people forget about the effectiveness of chemical weapons. They forget that North Korea has a lot of nerve gas, and that you can deliver nerve gas with artillery. So they can hit Seoul. They can hit the closer parts, like the suburbs that are closer to their border, with artillery that's chemically, nerve gas artillery, and they could go downwind into Seoul itself.
I mean, North Korea needs, in a conventional war, they would lose pretty damn quick if they didn't use nukes.
I don't think so. I actually think North.
Really?
So I don't think North Korea could invade with like combined arms, right? Like they couldn't conquer Seoul, right? They couldn't conquer the entirety of the Korean Peninsula. But North Korea has an extremely good defensive position. The United States couldn't defeat China conventionally during the Korean War because of how good they would have to lose like millions of people to defeat China and Korea in the end of the Korean War. Because basically Korea is a mountainous peninsula, right? So it's this unstoppable bunker system. It's this giant honeycomb bunker system where they could pin down any army that tries to advance into it.
Right, but I think they're more likely to try to invade the South than the South is to invade the North.
Well, yes, let's say that. That's true. But the South can't conquer the North. The United States can't really conquer the North unless if it lost millions and millions. You'd have to lose like 1 million soldiers. The United States would lose more people trying to conquer North Korea, unless if the army starves to death. Then like it would take. They would have to like starve them to death over years, and then North Korea could just keep hitting like the border with like nerve gas and shit. But it would kill more people than they lost in World War II to try and occupy, because it's so well defended in terms of like.
No, I mean in terms of
1950s.
If North Korea tried to invade the South, I think it would be a slaughter.
Oh yeah, but their military isn't built. Their military is built to kill as many civilians as possible. It's not built to conquer the South. Are you aware of like the Blue House raid and all that stuff? And like the killing of so North Korea has used state terrorism continuously against South Korea. So there was the Blue House raid where they tried to kill Park Chung-hee by sending like undercover commandos to attack the presidential palace in South Korea itself and assassinate the president in the 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
And they killed, I believe it was the prime minister or the president of South Korea once by using a bombing in Burma. Maybe it was just a cabinet member.
Are they trying to bait them into starting a war, or?
They basically, the anarchist concept of the propaganda of the deed.
No.
Okay, so the anarchist concept of the propaganda of the deed is basically you use terrorism to decapitate the leadership, to terrify people and think that their leaders can't protect them from the anarchists.
Okay.
So it's terrorism to show that the South Koreans, that their leaders can't protect them from North Korean terrorism by killing their leaders.
Right.
Rangoon bombing, 1983 was an assassination attempt against Chung. He was the president at the time, Chun Doo-han, 5th president of South Korea.
Do you think North Korea tries to play up how crazy their leadership is as like a way of keeping other people?
Yes. I also believe
like they try to make it look like their rulers are just mentally unstable.
Yes, that's a very good strategy to prevent somebody from starting a war with you. Because you have to realize is that even if we think that North Korea is more likely to invade the South than the South is to invade the North, right?
Mm-hmm.
But from psychologically, North Korea has the experience of being invaded and utterly defeated militarily by the United States. Right. So psychologically, they want to do everything they can to prevent themselves from being invaded.
Right. It's an interesting scenario. What about like action of the Iranian government giving like Hezbollah or someone nukes?
I don't think that Iran wants to destroy itself like that. Actually, I think that Israel is more aggressive towards Iran than Iran is to Israel.
Yeah, but I mean, someone trying to do.
I think it's more likely. So during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Soviet Union actually had nuclear missiles inside Cuba, and the United States didn't think that they did. So the United States, the Cuban Missile Crisis was really, really close to a nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union, or NATO and the Soviet Union, or Warsaw Pact, or whatever. So the United States had faulty information. They thought that they were directly preventing the Soviet Union from building the nuclear weapon sites. They didn't know that they're already there. So let's say that Israel conducts some kind of like tries to destroy an Iranian nuclear base, right? But Iran already has nukes. So Israel just attacked a nuclear armed state then.
Right.
I think that that's way more likely than Iran giving Hezbollah nukes.
Mm-hmm.
I guess maybe they could slip them, right? The slip scenario, but I actually think Iran is more stable. Well, Iran is an identity, and Persians have a strong sense of identity. Pakistanis don't have a strong sense of identity.
No, that's why I think Iran is
tribal.
I think, like as I've said, Pakistan is the country I'm the most worried about by far.
I think Israel is the second, actually, and then North Korea. So I put Pakistan, then Israel, then North Korea.
So is the Samson option a real thing, or is it a
Yes. The Samson option is basically what we talked about, North Korea using nuclear threat and diplomacy. Right. In 1973, they would have used nuclear weapons against Egypt had they lost conventionally. Right. So I don't know. Do you think that Egypt will ever have antithetical relations with Israel again?
I thought we were heading in that direction but then the super Muslim bros got overthrown.
Yeah.
So, but I don't know. Egypt is a very unstable country. They've gone back to a military dictatorship, but who knows how long that's going to last? Is the Muslim Brotherhood just biding its time? Like,
who knows? I don't pay that much attention to the internal politics of Egypt like I do with Russia or China or Ukraine.
Here's my worry with
Israel.
Israel. We have a millenarian, like extreme, like far right.
Well, Israel from a long point
As
of
a
view
result of
is
ultra orthodox.
Yeah, the ultra-Orthodox are going to have more and more power in the government. And the ultra-Orthodox are very irredentist.
Are they millenarian?
No, but they're irredentist.
Or are they just like ultra nationalist?
Well, here's the problem. Israel's really overpopulated and they need to expand. And that they're having children exponentially and they're being supported by welfare, the ultra-Orthodox. Their population doubles every 20 years. What?
Specifically, they're far right politically.
Yes, they're far right and they're irredentist and they support colonization of Palestine.
Right.
So Israel over time will support expansion and colonization of Palestine more and more. Even now, the ultra-Orthodox are at least have the power that blacks have over the Democratic Party in the United States, like comparable. The ultra-Orthodox have the conservative side in Israel by the balls. And so they're increasing, they're doubling every 20 years. So right now, aren't they 12 or 13% of the population?
Yeah. Like so
pretty likely a first strike, or we'll use.
But I mean, like, how big do they have to get before they are able to convince Bebe or the government to go into a expansionist war?
Well, Israel gets in expansionist wars, right? Or quasi-expansionist wars.
They haven't for a while.
But I mean, what do you mean? So like they'll just take the Sinai back. They'll have a preemptive war.
Reoccupy the Gaza Strip.
I don't know. I think the Gaza Strip is too densely populated. I think they want to control the water and populate the West Bank more. I mean, the West Bank. What?
Because the West Bank's less shitty.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the territory, it'd be better for them to occupy the Sinai and then colonize the Sinai, but they gave that up in the peace treaty with Egypt.
I kind of feel they shouldn't have.
Well, I mean, their biggest threat at the time was the Soviet Union, right? Is that the Soviet Union would have like conventional soldiers and they would be better than the conventional soldiers of Israel, and that they would fight along with Egypt and overrun Israel. So that was Israel's biggest concern. So they wanted to have Egypt be non-aggressive and not allied with the Soviet Union at the time. Eventually, the Soviet Union collapsed, and it's not allies with Egypt anymore, obviously. So, in retrospect, giving up the Sinai was a horrible decision. But at the time, it was a pretty good decision if they viewed the Soviet Union as lasting indefinitely.
Right. No, but I could just see, I view the larger percentage the ultra-Orthodox become, the bigger the odds of just more wars happening. Like,
absolutely.
Like, in particular, just like aggressive expansionist wars, or if like just using very flimsy casus bellis.
Yeah.
I mean, Israel does that already, but I mean, like, it getting much, much worse in the next couple of decades.
Well, the ultra-Orthodox are going to overpopulate the country, too. There's going to be population troubles there. I
The,
mean,
the
they don't.
worst aspect is they don't serve in the army.
Yeah, well, I think that they'll eventually collapse the state, right? Because they'll force the state to become too aggressive, and they're like they don't put anything into it, but they demand of the world from the state.
Yeah, because if they were like political extremists who served in the army, then that would be like a better situation.
Yeah, but they don't
For-
add anything to the state, and they demand the world of the state.
Yeah, but they push it like to crazy. I mean, let's like we can LARP for a
I
minute.
think that Israel will probably abandon democracy realistically, and it'll become a military dictatorship at that stage.
Mm-hmm.
The secular Israelis, at least the conservative secular Israelis, will be forced into that situation because such a direct democracy representation is absurd, especially when you have an exponentially growing minority population.
And I mean that the thing is that's always been one of his Israel. Like I don't want to sound like a neocon, but Israel's democracy has always been one of the reasons why it does so much better than the Arab states because they don't have the constant fear of a military coup.
I think that that's part of like I think that Muslim Arab societies have trust issues though that leads to the military coup problems. That isn't really like it wasn't a thing in like militarily controlled like so it's not a thing in like North Korea, right? Or in China or in like Asian communist states or like single party dictatorship. It's kind of endemic to the Arab world, I think. It's part of Arab
because
culture.
like I read a couple books about the 6 Day War, and like one of the major reasons Egypt did so poorly was they cut off communications between the different army units because they were scared of them coming together and marching on Cairo. So like the Egyptian high command was designed to be dysfunctional to prevent coups. Whereas the Israeli government was able to give the army complete autonomy to do whatever they want.
Libya was defeated by Chad, and Chad was using Toyotas with 50 caliber machine guns in their armored. That's what their equivalent of armored units were, and the Libyans were using like Soviet T-64 or T-62s and like T-55s and Chinese Type 59s. They actually had like armored divisions which were being defeated by pickup trucks with 50 caliber machine guns.
But like Egypt, the Arab coalition I think something people forget is the Arabs had just as good weapons, if not better.
Israel, the Arabs in the 6 Day War and Yom Kippur had probably superior weapons, actually.
Like they had like modern Soviet tanks and stuff like that.
Yeah, but they weren't capable of. They're so poorly trained. So in the United States, in the second Gulf War, when the United States like abandoned like Iraqi tanks, they found that the Iraqi tanks are actually armed with like training ammunition. The Iraqis were so ignorant and so poorly trained that they couldn't tell the difference between actual ammunition and training ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any other states you want to talk about likelihood of nuclear war?
I don't think any Latin American are any Latin American countries interested in nukes? I don't think so.
We'll see in like 20 years. I mean, if Brazil wants to prove that it's a world power and it's independent, might develop nuclear weapons for prosperity.
You mean posterity?
No, not posterity, for prestige, sorry.
Oh, prestige, okay.
Because nuclear weapons have a prestige kind of thing too. That's why the United Kingdom and France had them when they didn't really need them.
Mm-hmm. Now, what are the odds of like France or the UK just completely getting rid of their nuclear weapons?
I don't think that there's any reason for a state to unilaterally destroy its nuclear weapons
Because
without.
I mean, just politically, they
I
seem
think
to
that a
be heading.
state would prevent starvation, like South Africa, or like complete economic destruction, because Ukraine and Belarus and Kazakhstan gave up their nuclear weapons to Russia so that they could have economic investment from the West, right? That's the only
Also, I
reason
don't
why
think
it's happening.
they had the budget to maintain them.
I think that they did, but I don't think it's that high of a. Well, I guess the tritium kind of problem, but I think Ukraine knows that they made an immense mistake, because the taking of Crimea and the the civil war in the Donbass region, those are actually the two most economically important regions of Ukraine. And it's destroyed the Russians completely destroyed the Ukrainian economy. And actually, it's very likely that a so-called Russophile will win a presidential election in Ukraine, and the conflict will end with like there being a referendum over the Donbass region being part of Russia, and Ukraine will enter.
But
I think
isn't
it's
the
very
Donbass
possible, actually.
not going to be allowed to vote in the election?
Well, Donbass can't vote because it's occupied, right, by the separatists.
You mean in the rest of the country, though?
Yeah. Well, you have to realize like 20 to 30% of it before the Crimea, it was like Russian, ethnically identified as Russian. And there are large regions of
Right.
the country which are Russophone. Even there's
No, but I'm just
Ukrainian
saying,
Jews.
doesn't Crimea and Donbass leaving kind of change the demographics of
Yeah,
Ukraine?
it does, but the problem is that Ukraine doesn't have a doesn't. So if you look at the polls in them, there's no presidential contender that has over 20%.
Right.
It could go to a runoff. So you could have a Russophile go against like an extreme like Ukrainian like fascist or something really weird like that.
Like right sector or
Yeah,
something?
yeah, it could be something really weird. And that the Russophiles always win because the Russophiles are really moderate economically. They basically say we should trade. So they've always had a electoral advantage within Ukraine. They're always, we will trade with Russia and we'll trade with the West, and we will have cultural ties with Russia because we've always had cultural ties with Russia, and we'll be an independent country. That's always been the most popular democratic thing within Russia, and that's why the
Or
Russophiles
could it
have been dominant, and they've had to be color revolution twice to get
could
more
it also, I'm trying to
Russophiles.
think what else could have happened. Could the opposition, like the non-Russian candidate, also just be someone who's like a super dildo EU shill that no one likes?
Well, that's the problem. Is what's that woman that went to prison? I think she's like the number one leader right now. But she went to prison. She's extremely unpopular. She's basically like the Hillary Clinton of Ukraine, with like a very unpopular woman. I'll look her name up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But no, because I could see
Yulia
the ethnic Ukraine.
Tymoshenko, I think she's in the lead right now. So
Because I could see them fielding either a super dildo candidate or like an extreme right candidate, and either one of those being a disaster.
oh, it's going to be a complete, like, we have no idea what's going to happen. All the polls are like uncontrollable. We don't know what's going to happen. And
How
in
can they
fact, I
even
would
have?
say for 2019, the biggest election worldwide is the Ukrainian election, because it'll determine what will happen with Donbass.
Mm-hmm.
And keep in mind that American think tanks are saying it's very possible for a Russophile to win it, and that for the war in Donbass to end on pro-Russian terms.
Hasn't Russia basically won there?
So the Ukrainian military has to use the right sector and the Azov battalion and stuff, because the Ukrainian military is really incompetent.
Right.
And Russia took Crimea without any shot, without losing. So the Crimean occupation or invasion was extremely successful.
I feel like that
And there's
dramatically.
no way that Ukraine could take it back.
I
And
feel
that
like the Crimea
destroyed their
thing
economy.
destroyed the Ukraine's prestige.
Oh, yeah. Well, you have the problem where it's like their military commanders don't want to fight Russians because they see them as part. Because a lot of the military commanders initially,
All right.
when Ukraine separated, were actually ethnic Russians. Do I want brother wars? I want people to be willing to fight brother wars. Because if you're willing to fight, then you have an identity. I don't want there to be wars. I don't want somebody so apathetic about their identity that they won't fight for it.
Wasn't a lot of, I'd assume a lot of the military were, or most of them were ex-Soviet military.
Yeah. Yeah, so the military commander of Ukraine when Ukraine left the Soviet Union was actually an ethnic Russian. I think he's like a paratrooper. So like they don't really want to. So you have a kind of this existential problem where like Slavs don't want to fight Slavs. That's part of the reason. Yeah, because the Soviet Union, part of the reason that the coup didn't work is because the soldiers wouldn't want to kill civilian. Like they couldn't. It was very difficult for them to kill civilians. Well, it was easy for them to suppress. Like the Baltic state protesters, it was very difficult for them to kill like civilian Muscovites. They just couldn't really do it.
That's a big change from the Stalinist era.
Yeah, well, a lot of their leaders in the Stalinist era were like the leaders of the NKVD were like Jews, though.
Mm-hmm. The NKVD. What was I thinking of? It's a no, I could see that. I admit I've become a lot more sympathetic towards Russia since the Ukrainian church went dildo.
Yeah, I mean, somebody's yelling at me. Ukraine is a fake modernist identity. No, it's not. Ukrainian identity isn't like French identity or something, but I mean, there was I think it was like 96% of the country or 91 or something. Over 90% of the country voted to leave the Soviet Union, voted in the independence referendum. It's more like they want a year. The most common like idea of Ukrainians is they want kind of a European Union between Belarus and Russia and Ukraine, but they want Ukraine to be an independent state. They want cooperation between the Eastern Slavic states, but they don't want to be part of, because they fear they'll be culturally dominated by Russia. So especially Western Ukraine, which was part of Poland and then Habsburg Austria, Galicia, identifies as European and doesn't identify as like, because Russians don't necessarily, they identify as Eurasian. Their civilization is its own independent civilization is Eurasian. Right. And even though that they're both East Slavs, Ukrainians identify themselves as part of European civilization, especially Western Europeans. So you have with the Dnieper and the right bank and the left bank in Ukraine, you have a pretty big division. So left bank Ukrainians on the left side of the Dnieper, that's the eastern side, are like very, very Russophilic. And then right bank is very, very Europhilic or Ukrainophilic.
Is there a possibility of partitioning the country?
We'll see. Not right now. I mean, they would have to have like some kind of sweeping referendum, and that's kind of impossible. But I mean, it would be, if you divided it at the Dnieper, it would be a lot better, because most of the people on the western side of the Dnieper want a Ukrainian state. Most of the people on the eastern side at least want, like the majority probably want like some kind of European Union kind of scenario with Russia.
Like they want to be part of the Eurasian Union or
Yeah,
whatever.
they want some kind of Eurasian Union deal with Russia, and they identify as like Eastern Slavic, like pan-Eastern Slavic, but they want to be an independent nation. And the minority, like minority ethnically, want to just be part of Russia, like ethnic
Like
Russians.
Donbass?
Yeah, like Donbass just wants to be part of Russia.
Mm-hmm.
But like Belarus and like Ukraine aren't like LARP states though. Like they're real identities and people.
Belarus wants to be part of Russia though, right?
I think Belarus wants like basic, like they want to be on paper an independent state,
like an autonomous part of Russia.
Yeah, like a step above, like at a weird, like I don't know how far the union state is, because the union state is the idea of Belarus and Russia being one state, and they're floating that around.
And Kazakhstan, I think, also.
No, Kazakhstan is like after the annexation of Crimea, Kazakhstan has been going its own way. Like, even though it's like 20% of the country is ethnic Russian, and then like there's a lot of Russian business interests because of that, and connections to Russia, and it's landlocked and stuff. The Kazakhstan like government is now going to switch their language over the next few years, like very, very authoritarian. This is like extremely funny to me. They're going to switch from the Cyrillic alphabet to the Latin alphabet to show that they're not a Russian puppet, basically. The government's going to switch the language, force the language to be switched, like from one alphabet to the other, like Ataturk did.
Mir Sultan is fucking crazy.
Is that how you pronounce the leader's name in Kazakhstan?
I think so. Nur Sultan has continually asked the scientists of his country to invent immortality so he can lead them forever.
Yeah, so yeah, that's his first name. I don't know. I'm bad at pronouncing people's names. I probably have problems. So during the collapse of the Soviet Union, he was the most pro-Soviet major leader, and Gorbachev tried to lean on him really hard. And for instance, there was a meeting at the end where he called Boris Yeltsin a traitor to his face.
Right. I forget. Do you like Yeltsin or?
Yeltsin was very decisive in a way that Gorbachev simply wasn't. But Yeltsin pursued a policy which economically devastated Russia. And Russia was stuck in a position to where it had a great incentive to leave the Soviet Union, because Moldova and Russia, even though Moldova was like this tiny state that's like 1% of the total population of the Soviet Union, had the same amount of power as Russia, which was like 55% of the Soviet Union population wise. So Russia didn't dominate the Soviet Union. Part of the Soviet Union was about keeping the Russian ethnicity down and preventing like Russian identity, because it was Soviet identity over Russian identity, and it was this bureaucracy that's dedicated to controlling all of them. So it ended up being like Ukrainians were actually the most powerful ethnicity within the Soviet Union, and they had disproportionate control in it. So both like Khrushchev, Brezhnev, and Gorbachev were all like Ukrainians.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess it's kind of like hard to tell sometimes where Ukrainian starts and Russians end.
Yeah, it is. I would say, because there's a very gray territory. But when you get to Galicia, Galatians are extremely anti-Russian.
Mm-hmm.
If Galicia was its own independent country, the Soviet Union probably wouldn't have collapsed. Like if they just controlled like even like most of right bank Ukraine, just not Galicia, and like Lvov, or however you pronounce it, then like Ukrainians probably wouldn't have enough like gumption to separate.
Right. I think you said that the whole collapse of the USSR was kind of a prisoner's dilemma thing, where like a lot of the people who left didn't really want to leave.
Yes. There was
Like
two referendums, right? So you had the pan-Soviet Union referendum that Gorbachev did, where it was like 75% of all Soviets wanted to remain in the Soviet Union. And I think it's about similar Ukrainians themselves. And then later you had the Ukrainian referendum where it was like 91% or something of all Ukrainians wanted to leave.
Sorry, why did it change so much?
Because the coup. Because of the August coup. And the consequences thereof. People weren't able to, like, it created the situation where everyone panicked.
Mm-hmm.
And the Ukrainian referendum happened on the heels, like the election to create the Declaration of Independence within the I forget what they call their parliamentary body, happened on the heels of the coup. Like, it wasn't like cool-headed thinking.
Right.
A state which I think could develop nuclear weapons. You already talked about Vietnam and Iran. If Turkey goes independently, Turkey would have an incentive to develop nuclear weapons, definitely.
And we've talked about this.
Breaks off from NATO.
We've talked about this in the past. One of the single dumbest foreign policy decisions I've ever seen was the U.S. Throwing Turkey under the bus in favor of the Kurds.
Yes, absolutely. Because Turkey is the United States. It's hard to say if Turkey or Japan is the United States' most important geostrategic ally, but Turkey is the most important geostrategic ally against Russia because the Bosphorus is so effective at cutting off Russia from the world.
Also, Turkey has been a pretty loyal.
Turkey is
like like being part of NATO.
Turkey
like even
is
under
the best
Erdogan,
conventional military, the second best conventional military in NATO.
I mean, even within the like after Erdogan took out, I didn't really consider Erdogan to be particularly anti-Western.
Yeah, he wasn't very particularly anti-Western until the whole supporting the Kurds in Syria and Iraq.
Mm-hmm. But like the Kurds don't have like anything to offer us.
Well, they have
all they
something.
Are is a liability.
Their allies was Israel, so we support them. It's because of
whereas Turkey is like Turkey's almost a great power. Like Turkey's a very strong.
Well, Turkey
country.
Turkey is the second strongest conventional military in NATO. So Turkey is a better conventional military than Germany and France and the United Kingdom. At least it's army.
Also, Turk soldiers also the Turkish army has balls. So if push came to shove, they'd like fight.
Well, if Russia tried, Russia could barely defeat Turkey, just Turkey by itself, right? If there was a conventional war between the Soviet Union and NATO, the Soviet Union would actually be defensive and Turkey would be offensive. That was actually.
I don't think they could have beaten. I don't think they. Well, just geography.
They can't. Well, it's just Turkey is very, very defensible because it's so mountainous,
and it has a large population.
Yes, and it has a very large army, and it has a pretty strong.
And the people are like fanatically nationalistic.
Yes, so it would have a very and most of the people, contrary to popular belief, have IQs of Europeans. And in fact, when you look at Turkey, you're like, why does it have an 89 IQ? That's because the Kurds pull it down so much. If you look at Turkey province by province, Turks are actually higher than a lot of the Balkan countries IQ-wise. I mean,
regardless of how you feel about
took so many sex slaves, but
regardless of how you feel about the Ottomans or modern Turkey or whatever, the point is geopolitically they are a very important, useful ally. And they always have.
They control the Bosphorus. They have a population of 100 million. And in a war, because they have such a national identity, they would have a very high morale.
Oh, we're being called Turkish propaganda.
Whatever.
How do you feel about that?
I don't hate Turkish people.
I mean, I've been very critical of the Ottoman Empire in the past, but like,
I'd
I
race
just
mix with a Turkish girl if she'd convert to my religion.
well, it depends on the. It might not even be race mixing, depending.
Well, I don't think it is, but I'm just joking.
Like the thing is, I wish we had a Christian version of Erdogan. That would be amazing.
I think Orban and Erdogan are like similar to each other.
Mm-hmm. No, I really like no, it's just sad because I feel like Turkey has historically just been so like Europhilic and just so like wanting to like notice me senpai. And
Yeah.
America was like, fuck you, we like your retarded distant cousin.
I mean, isn't Turkey economically developed as most of the Balkans?
I mean, yeah, I mean there's a lot of issues with Turkey's economy. Like I think they borrowed a lot of money to build stuff. But it's just stupid.
Do you
Okay,
see any other
Europhilic.
states?
I meant Europhilic in the Ataturk era on. I don't mean the Ottoman Empire. I'm talking about the Republic of Turkey. I don't want Turkey to join the EU though.
I don't want the EU to exist.
That's a good point. Although I was just thinking as I said it, Turkey would at least vote against faggotry. They would actually. It's funny about I love what Ann Coulter said about Obama. I wish he was a Muslim because then he'd be against gay marriage and abortion.
Do you think Obama is gay?
I don't think so.
Because it got
kind of feel like
revealed. Did you see how it was revealed that he's Twitter subscribes to hardcore gay porn sites?
no.
He is. Barry the fairy.
Are the Turks not sending their best to Germany?
Well, let's be honest for a second. Are Bulgarians sending their best to Germany? Are Serbians sending their best to Germany?
No, but they're Christians at least.
I don't support the European Union, and I don't like Islam, so there you go. But I don't hate like Turks for being Turks, and I don't hate like.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I hate Saudi Arabia. I do hate Saudi Arabia.
No, I really hate Saudi Arabia the most, like of any country on earth.
Yeah, Saudi Arabia is a country that would be really bad if it had nukes. Really, really bad because Saudi Arabia is
they would give them to terrorists.
Yeah, well, I believe that Saudi Arabia's government is responsible for 9/11. Essentially, I believe that the Saudi Arabian government hasn't been revealed to the American people, but like that there's princes in Saudi Arabia because Osama bin Laden was a distant relative of the royal family, right?
Right. Well, this is like half of the country.
Yeah. So yeah, but so parts of the government are just siphoning off tax money to give to terrorist organizations. I mean, isn't that? Do you even think that's a conspiracy, or is that just public?
No, it's just like it just is what it is. I don't think anybody.
Yeah. So, but here's something else: is that if Saudi Arabia had nuclear weapons, Saudi Arabia is always at a danger of being coup d'etat by Islamic fundamentalists. More extreme than the House of Saud.
If that's possible. No, it is possible. Do we know? Were they giving money to ISIS or?
I don't think the state was directly giving money to ISIS, but didn't Qatar like get caught directly giving money to ISIS, and others like
I
Saudi
think
Arabia like
so.
condemned them?
Mhm. Oh,
But
just while you're here, just somebody's talking about 9/11. What do you think happened with 9/11? I don't know if I've ever asked you.
uh, so I'm not against conspiracy theories about 9/11 as such as like the United States government did it, or even like Israel did it or whatever. But I think that elements of the Saudi government directly financially supported 9/11, and then the US government covered it up.
I
And the
actually think
US government should have invaded both Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan.
I lean towards just thinking that it was mostly just Islamists with Saudi backing. I don't.
I mean,
I've
do
kind of gone
Occam's
against it
razor
being
on
some
it.
kind of false flag.
Well, what makes more sense? The United States government did a false flag and then perfectly covered it up,
And
or
nobody like knew about it.
yeah, the United States government isn't competent enough, as we talked about before, to build nuclear triggers like tritium, and it isn't competent enough to even have an Obamacare website government like working, right? It isn't competent enough to conceal that they spied on Trump's campaign, right? How is it competent enough not to reveal that it attacked itself in a false flag attack?
Also, I don't see like what would be so difficult about um the just terrorists doing that. Like it doesn't seem like
It's
that would
not a
be.
very hard thing to do. Now, I will say another thing I will say is that um the terrorists might have not had like the paper trail might have been like hoaxed by the US. And I mean like so like the idea that they found the so-called passports in the rubble, obviously that didn't happen.
Mhm.
Uh the people that they said hijacked the plane might not be the people they said that hijacked the plane, and they don't know who actually hijacked the plane. Like I'm like that might actually be true.
I think if
But
there's a
I think that they're part
conspiracy,
of
is
Al
that they
Qaeda.
covered up how bad they fucked up.
Yeah, I think they covered that up, and I think that they covered up Saudi and Qatar, and like they covered up connections outside of the Taliban between Al Qaeda and other nations, and they covered up how much they knew because I'm pretty sure they knew about it beforehand, and they just didn't act on it because we know that they, like for instance, with the FBI knew that that kid in Florida was going to shoot up that high school or whatever, and just didn't act on it, and we know that like UK and the United States and France have massive databases, and most of the times when like somebody shoots something up, they know beforehand that the person's going to shoot it up. Like usually they have files on these people
I
to
just
some
lean
extent.
towards them being grossly incompetent.
I don't think that they do like I think they look the other way for political reasons because they don't want to be racist, and they're grossly incompetent at the same time.
Like in a lot of, I just think that a lot of these people are just really fucking stupid. Like that's just like I
I
don't
think
know
they're
if
really
like
fucking stupid and they have your mild concern. Like I think Hillary Clinton, when Americans die, I think she feels mild concern. I think Bill Clinton and George W. Bush feel mild concern to dead Americans.
mhm.
Like I don't think that they're capable of feeling bad about 9/11.
No, I don't think they are either. It's so
Yeah,
I don't
Building
know.
7 is
Like
weird, but even then I still think the Occam's razor of like Muslims did it makes
I
more
don't, could
sense.
there be something like they had additional bombs planted or something, and
Well, I think it's
also
possible that the Al Qaeda or Muslims or whatever you want to say actually planted bombs in the building and they covered up to prevent. Like they were so incompetent, they planted bombs in the building, and that like the security just looked the other way, and then the government covered it up. I'm not kidding. Like that actually makes more sense to me than the government did it.
like No, it's just the idea that terror, like that Islamic terrorists would pull off something like that. It just doesn't seem like, I don't get why that's such a far-fetched thing. Like, why you have to invent, like, because they do shit like this all the time. Like, they do like these
It's
ops
not
where
a
they go
very
like,
hard thing to do, though, to hijack planes, fly them in the buildings, and then have the planes strip a floor. Like, because it's stripped a floor. Like, what happened is that, like, when Loose Change talks about like the two towers falling at free fall, it's like, well, like a whole floor basically snapped in half, and then you have like 50 stories that start falling on top of the other floor.
mm-hmm.
And the jet fuel can bend steel beams, especially
no,
if
jet
it's
fuel can't melt steel.
like jet fuel can bend steel though, especially if it has like a lot of weight sitting on top of it.
There's a guy who did it, like, where he heated up. He was like a blacksmith. He like heated it up to the same temperature, and then he bent the steel bar with his pinky.
Yeah, but that fire was also like closed off, right? So it would have even gotten hotter than what you would burn this, because it was like, you know what I mean? And parts of the support structures were knocked out anyway. So the top stories were not resting right. So if the heat bended the beams, it would cause the stories above to fall.
Like, I just, I don't get why that's like a completely crazy, like, take on the whole thing. Maybe it's just like my post Edge phase where I'm not as like, I don't need to. It's just, also there's just been so many Islamic ops, like like they had all the, like that one in France where they shot up all the nightclubs and
Well,
stuff like that.
that's actually not, that's just as, I mean, the Palestinians hijacked airplanes and then flew them into Uganda.
Mm-hmm.
Why is Al Qaeda not capable of doing the same thing, just flying them into buildings?
Yeah, and I know we're probably going to piss off a lot of people here. Sorry, guys. I like, I just don't see a need to insert. I think it was just, I think if there's a conspiracy, it was the US government like made shit up to try to make it themselves look less incompetent and
Yes.
things like that. And I think regardless of whether or not it's a conspiracy, it was used to justify one of the most retarded wars in history.
Do you believe that the government is deliberately importing opium from Afghanistan?
No, like, okay, so is that thing about the CIA importing cocaine, is that real or is that a meme?
Yes. They imported it
Oh, that
through
one's real.
Arkansas, and Bill Clinton was directly connected to it. Because Bill
Right.
Clinton was the governor of Arkansas, and there were like people that were assassinated that found out about it and stuff.
It's funny how everyone like called like Trump a piece of shit. Like he's always Trump. But there was never, like, of all the things they accused him of, I never heard an accusation that he had somebody whacked. Whereas with Clinton,
There's like
there's
numerous like
dozens
two or three
of
dozen.
like credible, like not even just like crazy, like credible, like what does it say if you're
Vince
considering
Neil shot
electing?
himself in the back of the head twice,
Yeah,
and then
and Vince
immediately fell in a
Foster.
hole. Or Vince Foster. I said Vince Neil from Motley Crue. Yeah, Vince
And that
Foster.
guy who got shot on a robbery gone wrong, and then they didn't take anything.
Yeah. And then what was the plane that didn't have the black box on it that went down over Serbia? That had
I don't
there
know.
was like some high-ranking U.S. cabinet member that died.
But like, regardless of whether or not these things are real, the fact that these are like legitimate, non like these aren't like cuckoo for cocoa puffs like things. These are like, there's real evidence, and these things are plausible. Um, Okay, someone in the chat says Vince Foster's family still blames the Clintons for his death. 2 shots to the back of the head, obviously, is suicide.
Yeah, 2 shots to the back of the head and then falls in a hole that they just buried for themselves or their body to have.
Who do you think killed Scalia?
I'm gonna say it's possible there's a conspiracy, but I'm not going like there's not enough information for me to say it was a conspiracy.
I like it's one of the few cases where I actually do think it was a conspiracy.
Okay, so Ron Brown was the Secretary of Commerce that got shot down under mysterious circumstances in Croatia. Or his plane went down under mysterious circumstances in Croatia in 1996.
I actually and I'm very unlikely to think things are a conspiracy, but I kind of think Scalia got whacked because it's just
Scalia
so
was what happened is it seemed like he was going to shoot down affirmative action, and that's what people say that he got assassinated over, is that Scalia, there would have been a 5-4 decision on affirmative action, and by assassinating Scalia they prevented it, and it was just 4-4.
Wasn't he in good health though, and they didn't do a
Didn't he die in his bed from a pillow being on his head?
Yeah.
It's kind of weird, man.
That sounds credible.
Yeah.
And then they did do an autopsy.
Yeah.
One of America's leading public figures dies under mysterious.
You want to talk about, do you think Ginsburg is dead or on her deathbed?
I think Paul's dead. I don't know about Ginsburg.
Okay.
No, I was making a joke.
Yeah, I know all about Fall.
I don't know if Ginsburg's dead or not.
She hasn't appeared publicly in 3 weeks, hasn't she?
Now, why would they be covering it up?
Because they don't want it there to be a fight over the Supreme Court again.
Yeah, but
because if she isn't,
can't put it off for the next 2 years.
I mean, eventually it will get out, but they can have her there's people that are harder core conspiracy theorists that think they're going to have a body double for her, and she's going to be the Supreme Court justice. I've heard people say that online, but the idea is more of if they have her if she's incapacitated, they can keep her incapacitated indefinitely, and the Senate has to impeach her. And there's only been one impeachment of a Supreme Court justice. She can be incapacitated and then just have a 4-4 court indefinitely, or she could be incapacitated and have them just have somebody else dictating, which is probably what's happening right now, or decisions.
Oh, so
it's not unconstitutional to do that stuff from bed, actually. She could be on her deathbed and remain as part of the Supreme Court and do it from her bed and be completely.
You mean with Strom Thurmond?
Yeah, it's completely possible. It's constitutionally there's nothing against the Constitution of so she could be she could be in a coma basically, and then they could keep it, and then they if she's in a coma, they have to impeach her. They actually have to impeach her if she's in a coma. There's no constitutional if she never resolves, if she's in a coma, she's technically still the acting Supreme Court justice constitutionally.
Mm-hmm. But Strom Thurmond was a vegetable, but they kept him as senator. So
yep.
So what do you think she's dead, or?
I think that she's at least she's incapable of being a Supreme Court justice.
I would tend to
she's
agree.
Physically incapable right now. I'm going to say that at least. I believe that was a great deal of certainty.
Right.
And that basically somebody else is doing her job, and that's unconstitutional, but they're hiding it. And that they would have to legally prove that's happening and then impeach her. And if they prove that happened, well, what are you going to do about it? Her corpse is still, or like her comatose body still the Supreme Court, because then they have to impeach her in the Senate and they won't have the power because they don't have a 60. Like the Democrats will just vote in a straight line, and it'll just be 53 or 54 or something. Like in the, it's so laughable, but it's probably going to happen.
They just have her hooked up to like a life support system.
Yeah, she's going to be for 2 years until Trump gets out of office. I'm not even kidding. That's what they want to do.
I wonder if like one of the Republicans should just step down so Trump can appoint someone younger.
What's the black guy's name again? I'm tired.
Clarence Thomas.
Clarence Thomas is like the oldest, right? The oldest Republican.
I do have a lot of respect for Clarence Thomas.
Yeah, I have respect for him too, but I guess if he wants to, but he probably has too much respect for the Supreme Court to be explicitly.
Oh, he's not that. He's only 70. Okay, he
can
I know,
but I mean, yeah, let's say like he at 72 and then Trump appoints somebody like that. I think he has too much respect for the Supreme Court and the independence of the judges to do that.
I wonder if Stephen Breyer will.
I think if Trump makes it to a second term, Breyer will. I think Breyer isn't he's just as bad a person as Ginsburg, but I don't think that he would be on his deathbed and deliberately allow himself to be in a coma. I think he would retire rather than do something, because Ginsburg is just full of hate, right?
I
don't think that she would retire. She'd rather have the fiasco of being comatose and being hooked up to life machines.
Because if Trump somehow got another term, he might get another.
Yeah, if he got another term, he would probably be able to replace Breyer. I don't think
Sotomayor might actually not make it through another term.
I don't think Sotomayor will. I don't think that she's going to make it to 90 because of her diabetes or whatever. And she's been hospitalized for diabetes. She remains overweight, but I think that she'll last until Trump. Even if Trump had a second term, she'll last till the end of it at least.
Right. How do you feel about John Roberts? Oh, sorry, go on.
I think that she's the kind of person that if I think that she's worse than Breyer. I think that she would put herself in a situation where she's on her death's door and she would just hang on to power until Trump left office.
Is Kagan the worst?
Kagan's the worst of all. But John Roberts is now the swing vote.
You know what's funny? Neil Gorsuch is the only Protestant on the Supreme Court.
Yep.
What do you think of John Roberts?
John Roberts is a swing vote, and John Roberts is the most liberal Republican appointed judge right now. John Roberts, I think he said that he doesn't want the court to be ideological whenever he votes along with the Democrat appointed judges. He often says that.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of like a rhino or whatever. I don't know. He's like a rhino version of a judge.
I don't think he'd vote against freedom of speech, though.
No. I don't even know if Ginsburg would vote against freedom of speech, actually. I think Kagan and Sotomayor would.
But as far as I go,
what?
As far as I go, so long as they're allowed, they get as I've said, I don't really care that much. It would be nice if Brett or Neil could do something more substantive, but the fact that neither of them will find a hate speech clause is good enough for me.
Yeah. I mean, if you could, maybe they'll ban partial birth abortions.
That would be good.
I mean, you could have something like that,
or they could allow states to do certain things.
I think partial birth abortions are so egregious that I think that you're getting to a point where 90% of Americans oppose it.
Mm-hmm.
Only the very you would have to be completely ignorant of what they are or be a member of Planned Parenthood to support partial birth abortions.
Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I have no idea whether or not Trump's going to win the next. I think it's possible.
I
I think
lean
it's
towards that he's going to lose. I think that he's been too insuccessful, and I think that Florida's can't be won by a Republican anymore. I think
I
that
think he could
basically means
win like Michigan or Minnesota or like one of those states again.
yeah, but they're purple state. It's not like it's a surefire thing. He has to win like all of them to recover from losing Florida. Because Florida is like the third, like tied is the third biggest, isn't it? Or second biggest or something.
I don't know. I think it's going to be a
we'll see what happens, because I like how we just automatically shift to this, but so what's really interesting is Iowa and New Hampshire are the biggest states. So some progressive white candidate is going to have the lead before it shifts to the South and whoever's the black person. And there's a really long time until the Hispanic, because it's going to be racial based by state in the primaries. Mm-hmm. So initially, most of the white supermajority states are first. So somebody like Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren are going to cover those states. And so they'll have the lead going in, and they'll push out all like the minor people. So it'll be interesting if, and it's also interesting to see if Kamala Harris can act, like if black people will vote for her. Because she's not American black. She's children of a South Indian and Jamaican immigrants.
Well, we know who we want, who we're endorsing for president. We're endorsing Andrew Yang.
Oh, damn right we are.
This is fucking Nazbol. But no, I think it depends who they run. I don't know. I think Trump can beat Elizabeth Warren.
I think Elizabeth Warren can't win a general election because of the whole Indian thing.
I just think she's a doofus in general.
I don't think Biden can win the primaries. I think he's too. I don't think a moderate can win a divided field, especially when Trump is the opposition.
How radical is Julian Castro?
I don't know that much about him. I'd have to look through him. I think he's pretty bad because Obama did some really bad stuff with housing when he was president, and that's what he was the head of.
Mm-hmm.
He's also was the mayor of Austin, so Austin's pretty culturally out there.
Right.
But he'd have to hang on to get to the Southwest states. You'd have to hang on for a really long time.
Yeah.
Because the Southwest states are like in Super Tuesday, so he'd have to hang on till Super Tuesday. You have to realize that, like, the reason that so many of them are running is because they don't intend to win. They intend to get cabinet positions through running.
Right. Is there going to be a major challenger for Trump?
Mitt Romney is the biggest possible challenger. There'll probably be a conservative.
I wonder if McMuffin will try again.
McMuffin. I think that, like, what's the guy from Arizona that was the super cuck, the senator?
Jeff Flake.
I think Jeff Flake will probably try.
Mm-hmm.
I think he'll try to primary Trump, but nobody will care. I don't think that Trump is. I don't think Trump. Whoever tries to primary Trump, they won't do as good as Buchanan did against Bush in '92, like anywhere near that.
How did Buchanan do against Bush?
He took like 22% of the total voters, but he didn't win any states. Ronald Reagan actually almost beat Ford in '76.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was extremely close.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think that's a good place to end. I just
holy shit! Okay. Oh, never mind.
Oh, what were
I was on the wrong. I thought for a second I was on the wrong tab, so I was looking at Ron Brown's tab on Wikipedia, and I thought I was looking at Julian Castro's tab, and I was like, Julian Castro's son went to prison, but it was Ron Brown, the guy that was likely assassinated by Clinton in Croatia. his son. Ron Bland was black, by the way.
Mm-hmm. Anyways,
I think that was a pretty good episode. So the other thing is I've been reading through Argent's book again. I read an earlier copy, but Argent added a bunch of stuff. So to do a video review, I was going to reread through it to see how well the stuff that Argent balanced in it. I'm about 60% the way through his book, and I'll finish it.
I put a lot of extra stuff in.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. So I'll review.
Was average degeneracy in the version you read?
No, average degeneracy and the Nazbol uprising in California weren't in the version I read.
Do you do you get the? You haven't seen the Lord of the Rings movies, have you?
No, I tried to. I read through Fellowship of the Ring, and I read through a third of Two Towers, and then I gave it up.
Okay, because the Nazbol uprising is like a direct.
Yeah, I'll finish.
It's a direct.
I'll try to finish Two Towers pretty soon.
Or just watch the movies.
I want to actually read the book more than I want to watch the movie.
Okay.
But it's kind of weird that I don't like them, but it's just always been that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, anyways, thanks for coming on. Always appreciated. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to watch us instead of watching City Named Sports Ball. I just wanted to say God bless you all. Have a good remaining couple hours in the weekend. Night, everybody.